Welcome. Thank you all for being here this evening at the Loudoun Museum. My name is Carrie Christopherson. I'm the Executive Director here at the museum, and we are delighted to be able to have our esteemed guests with us this evening and to be able to offer Loudoun County and all of our visitors this exhibit on Lafayette and this important moment in the history of our country and the history of Lafayette. So I'll just say a couple of words about our two speakers. Chuck is hiding in the back of the room, but he is there. He's the executive director of the AFL, and he has been a key player and driving force in the work that the AFL does to educate about Lafayette, his priorities, and Franco-American relations for more than 15 years. He also has a day job that he works, but we're just delighted that he keeps the AFL going in the way that he does as their executive director. And he will speak second. Thank you, Chuck. And we also have with us Patricia Maclay, who is the Vice Chair of the AFL Bicentennial Lafayette Tour Committee, and I might not have all those words in the right order, but I think you get the gist. She's also deeply affiliated with the DAR. She works on their Franco-American relations group, and she's a physician, so everybody's got a day job, which is nice. But we're excited to hear from both of them a bit about Lafayette's life and his relationship, particularly with George Washington, and then also a bit about the tour that he took and what's happening right now to commemorate that Bicentennial tour. So with that, I will hand it over to Dr. Patty, and we'll get started. Thank you all.
Great. Thank you so much, Carrie, and thank you guys for letting me be here today. This is one of my most favorite topics, is talking about Washington and Lafayette. So tonight I would like to share with you how and why Washington and Lafayette seemed to so quickly develop the close father-son bond that they shared throughout their lives. To tell this story, I will use as often as I can the voices of the women who knew and loved them both. Yeah, and they were the most important part, right? Sorry, guys. There were many documented references to this close adopted father, adopted son bond found in the letters that were sent between Washington and Lafayette. But that this relationship existed can also be found in the writings of many others who witnessed it firsthand. For those of you out there who think that Alexander Hamilton shared a similar bond with Washington, history does not support such a premise. And this is despite the fact that there were many who could have documented such a relationship indeed if it had indeed existed. No, this is the story of why Washington and Lafayette alone had such a father-son bond. So who was this hero of both America and France, and how did he gain the love and respect of both George Washington and our nation? Well, Lafayette began his life as a wealthy French aristocrat with an impressively lengthy name. Marie-Joseph Paul-Yves Roch Gilbert du Moutier, Marquis de Lafayette. Say that again, right? That's what his name. That lengthy name seemed to foretell of what would be his long and productive life, always devoted to the Enlightenment principles of freedom and democracy. The story of Washington and Lafayette began in July of 1777 when Washington had traveled to Philadelphia to update Congress on the war situation. It was there at a dinner held in his honor that the general first met young Lafayette. Congress had already informed Washington that he was free to do as he liked with this eager young 19-year-old, as long as he kept him alive due to his wealth and influence with the French court. Yet before the month of August waned, Lafayette became a member of Washington's military family, was seen riding next to him when reviewing the troops, and was frequently already engaged in private conversations with the general. By early September, he was standing close by Washington as he prepared for the Battle of Brandywine, And you'll see behind these, we should get a curtain there, right? Behind him is also, if anybody recognized that other general, it's Nathaniel Greene, who in many times also took on that kind of paternal role with Lafayette. Of this relationship, Washington biographer Douglas Freeman has said, quote, "Never during the Revolution was there so speedy and complete a conquest of the heart of Washington." So who was this boy general? Gilbert was born on September 6th of 1757 in a town of Chavagnac in southwestern France. His mother's family was extremely wealthy and among the most prominent of Versailles nobility. His father's family was rural nobility, but they had a strong French military history, as the Lafayettes fought both in the Crusades as well as rode next to Joan of Arc. When Gilbert was not yet 2, his father was killed by a British cannonball at the Battle of Minden during the 7 Years' War between France and England. And that war, of course, in the colonies was called the French and Indian War. Gilbert's mother was heartbroken and left Chavagnac and to live in Paris with her family, where she also prepared the way for Gilbert to be able to enter court life. Young Gilbert was left to the loving care of his fraternal grandmother and 2 aunts, all strong women of great intelligence and integrity. And I often like to say that Lafayette was who he was, just because he was raised by 3 women. And so the red-headed, hazel-eyed, and befreckled Gilbert became the 4th Marquis de Lafayette. At age 10, his mother brought him to Paris so as to continue an education fit for nobility. Gilbert was very bright and gifted in many subjects, especially in the classics and languages. His gift of Latin explained his ability to quickly become quite proficient at speaking English. The story is also told that when asked by his professor to write an essay on the perfect horse, while the other young male students were recounting its speed and its beauty and its perfect obedience to its master, Gilbert wrote that the perfect horse was the one who, when its master reached for the whip, would immediately throw him to the ground. He was already working on the concepts of rebellion. By age 12, after the deaths of both his mother and grandfather, Lafayette became an orphan, yet he was one of the richest orphans in France. Soon thereafter, a marriage was arranged, this being to Adrienne Noé, who was from one of the wealthiest families in France with direct access to the court at Versailles. In her writings, she remarks that when they first met, Gilbert was kind to her, but treated her as if she were a child. She, however, fell madly in love with him, quote and unquote. They were married in April of 1774. Adrienne was but 14 and Gilbert was 16. Later in life, Lafayette would write, quote, "I shall never stop trying to demonstrate my firm and tender love for the woman I had the good fortune to marry." Their first child, Henriette, was born in 1776, but sadly, she died before her 2nd birthday while Gilbert was away in America. Now, Gilbert hated the court life of Paris and Versailles and rather sought the military world of his father. He began his military training as a boy, and at age 13 was commissioned a 2nd lieutenant in the Black Musketeers. Yes, that set of musketeers. At age 15, he was appointed a lieutenant in the Royal Noailles Dragoons, the most elite fighting force in France, and also run by his father-in-law. It was during the summer of 1775, when engaged in the military training at Metz, France, that Gilbert, age 17, first heard of the American fight for freedom from a guest at a dinner attended by the English ambassador to France. This guest was none other than King George III's brother, Prince William, the Duke of Gloucester, who sided with the rebellious colonies. Lafayette wrote, quote, "I gave my heart to the Americans and thought nothing else but to raise my banner and add my colors to theirs." And although not mentioned, it was the perfect opportunity for him to seek revenge against the English who killed his father and humiliated the French nation at the end of the 7 Years' War. Pictured here on the right is the Lafayette family coat of arms. And in the center is Gilbert's version, to which he added that rebellious horse at the top, ready to throw its master, and the phrase, "Care non," meaning why not. It was a phrase he lived by all of his life. Very soon thereafter, Gilbert asked Silas Deane, the American commissioner to France, for a position in the Continental Army. Deane was tasked by Congress to seek material aid from the French and hire just 4 military engineers. But instead, he signed up many French officers, most unqualified and all wanting a salary. So to Deane, who better to recruit than a wealthy young nobleman of high birth, driven by the desire for battle and revenge. However, unbeknownst to Lafayette, Deane's French officer appointments meant nothing to either General Washington or the American Congress. They considered the young French officers as inept and purely glory-seeking. In April of 1777, overjoyed with his appointment as a major general, Lafayette bought and equipped his own ship, which he renamed La Victoire, for victory. At age 19, he sailed to America to join the Continental Army. He had to leave secretly as the French King Louis XVI had forbidden his going so as to not upset the uneasy treaty that existed between France and England since the end of that 7 Years' War. Lafayette left so quickly that he could not even tell Adrienne, but had to write to her of his journey. And by the way, he never dressed as a woman in order to evade capture by the French soldiers, and that is a myth that has gone around, but no, he never dressed as a woman. I'm sure he would have looked nice, but Adrienne was now 17, a lady-in-waiting for Queen Marie Antoinette and pregnant with her second child, who was going to be called Anastasie. Unlike most women of her social rank, Adrienne, like Lafayette, embraced the Enlightenment concepts of freedom and democracy. She was a staunch supporter of his ideals and shared his commitment to liberty and justice. As Lafayette sailed to America, he could neither speak English nor had yet to fire his first shot in battle. In fact, during most of the journey, he was horribly seasick, something that would plague him on all future sea voyages. Yet he was determined to demonstrate his worth to the American cause and worked diligently to learn English and continued his studies in military tactics. On June 7th of 1777, Gilbert wrote to Adrienne, quote, "The welfare of America is bound closely to the welfare of all humanity. She is to become the honored and safe asylum of liberty." Gilbert landed in South Carolina on June 13th of 1777 and with much hardship made his way to Philadelphia. Once there, Congress, thinking he was just another one of those inept French officers, refused to even see him. Then, when they acknowledged his letter of introduction from Benjamin Franklin and recognized Lafayette's wealth and nobility, plus the fact that he refused an officer's pay, which really helped, they decided to allow him to keep his commission as a major general under the proviso that he would not have an active command of any troops. Despite this disappointment, Gilbert's letters to Adrienne were filled with excitement about his meeting the great General Washington. He was but 19 and the general was 46. It was at that dinner, held in City Tavern in Philadelphia, when Gilbert first saw and was inspired by Washington. At that same dinner, everyone was taken with Gilbert's charm. But what was most appealing was his obvious awe of the general. Later, the very reserved Washington himself would write that he felt from first sight that the boy was worthy of esteem and attachment. At the end of this first meeting, Washington asked Lafayette to join his military family. Gilbert was overjoyed to be included and to have the opportunity to be so very close to the general. However, he was not aware of the fact that General Washington had been told by Congress that above all, he must keep Lafayette out of danger, again, due to his wealth and connections with the French king. Later, it was Washington's own desire to keep him out of danger. So now we will turn to another person besides Adrienne, who knew and loved Lafayette, and this is Martha Washington. Now, Martha first met Gilbert at Valley Forge in 1777. She would have easily come to understand how her husband's deep affection for Gilbert, in part, had much to do with his own past, especially his younger years. George Washington was born on February 22nd of 1732. Like Gilbert, his father died when he was quite young at the age of 11. Because he did not have a close relationship with his mother, he essentially felt as if he were an orphan. This prompted him to be independent and self-reliant. Like Gilbert's own paternal great-grandfather, George's older half-brother Lawrence became his protector and educator. As the eldest son, Lawrence had already received his education in England. He took it upon himself to instruct George in the classics and to promote constant self-enlightenment, emphasizing individual honor, civility, and courtesy to all, no matter what their rank in life. In his youth, Washington was a boy of deep emotions and passions, just like young Gilbert. With age, he trained himself to mask his feelings with a reserved exterior that we've come to understand. But just as with Gilbert, George hungered for approval from others and desired admiration and respect. Yet both George and Gilbert were somewhat socially awkward in their youth, owing to their rural upbringings. And to make matters even worse, both were much taller than those around them and each had bright red hair. So they could not avoid the immediate attention of others. George worked to improve himself both socially and in appearance, as he was born neither into high wealth nor the aristocracy of the New World. George, like Gilbert, had a strong desire to serve as an officer and acquire a military education. This goal became a reality with the onset of the French and Indian War in 1754. In the year prior, the 22-year-old Washington had led a small Virginia militia on a diplomatic mission to the French in the Ohio Valley. He failed miserably in this mission, and things soon escalated. King George II sent General Edward Braddock and a large number of reinforcements so as to reestablish the balance of power in favor of the English. Now, just as Washington took Gilbert as his protege, General Braddock took George as his personal aide. He learned much from Braddock, and in particular, to always ask the opinion of others no matter their rank or age. George protected his emotions, but to Martha he could open his heart. They married in 1759, she being the richest widow in Virginia. Washington became both a devoted husband and a loving surrogate father to her children. Some scholars do think that Washington did regret not having children of his own, especially a son. So it is of no surprise that he quickly developed an attachment to young Gilbert, not only because he saw in him his very own youthful self, but also perhaps the son that he did not have. Now we will turn to another woman who knew Gilbert, and this is Caddy Green, who was the young wife of General Nathaniel Greene. Caddy wrote that when Lafayette first arrived in Valley Forge on October 18th of 1777, it had been a mere 5 weeks since he had been shot in the calf at the Battle of Brandywine. He could wear only one boot, but despite the incredibly harsh conditions that winter, he insisted upon joining General Washington. That the young Frenchman was George's favorite did not miss Caddy's attention. Caddy spoke fluent French, so she could easily speak with the young Gilbert. Their conversations focused on many things, including how much he missed his wife and French homeland. But what was unmistakable was his devotion to General Washington, not only as his commander and teacher, but as a son to an adored father. Caddy knew of Lafayette through her husband's writings. One such letter recounted a now famous conversation between General Washington and Lafayette soon after they met. Washington and his officers were inspecting Philadelphia fortifications when the general said aloud, "We should be embarrassed to show ourselves to an officer who has just left the French army." However, the young Lafayette immediately responded, saying, "General Washington, I am here to learn and not to teach." Greene wrote that it was this unexpected response and Lafayette's constant generosity to others that endeared him to his fellow officers and most certainly to the general. To Greene and others, it was obvious that the general's affection for the young Frenchman ran quite deep and was just as sincerely reciprocated. In another correspondence, General Greene wrote frequently to Caddy about the war. This included the Battle of Monmouth Courthouse. It took place on an unbearably hot day in June of 1778. Most agreed that the incompetent General Charles Lee should never have replaced the intelligent and capable Lafayette as one of the commanders of the attack. In doing so, the battle that could have been won instead ended in a draw. Exhausted after that fight, and after seeing to his own men, Greene returned very late to Washington's headquarters. As he was about to lay his cloak upon the ground to rest, he looked up and saw nearby General Washington, asleep on his own cloak, and sleeping next to him on that very same cloak was the young Gilbert. It appeared that they had fallen asleep together while discussing the battle. Greene wrote that he smiled at the scene, not at all surprised, as he had watched their attachments grow close over the months since their first meeting. Greene himself found the young Frenchman endearing, owing to his engaging charm, and added that observing Washington and Lafayette's growing father-son bond was, quote, a touching distraction from the grisly horrors of the war. By December of 1778, while in an area of Fishkill, New York, Gilbert contracted a high fever, leading the doctors to fear for his life. He was cared for in the Brickerhoff family home. Washington immediately sent his personal physician, Dr. John Corcoran, to care for him. General Greene wrote that Washington rode often to visit Gilbert, and on most days he would return visibly distraught. When Gilbert began to recover, Greene wrote that the general's joy was evident to all. A month later, in January of 1779, Lafayette, with Washington's blessing, set sail for France to petition King Louis XVI for even more support for the American cause. His ship, the Hancock, was renamed the Alliance by Congress. It was a 36-gun sailing frigate and thought to be the very finest warship in the Western Atlantic. No efforts were spared to protect Lafayette, now considered a hero by both America and France. In February of 1777, through the efforts of Ben Franklin, France had already recognized American independence from England, pledging their alliance and financial aid. But it was Lafayette who convinced the king to give even more aid to the Americans, as well as commit the French army and that much-needed French navy to aid in our fight for independence. Lafayette returned to America in March of 1780 in one of the fastest French ships, the Hermione. You didn't have to sneak out this time. Gilbert landed in Boston in April and was escorted by a special unit of cavalry sent by Washington himself to protect him on his journey to the Continental Army's winter headquarters at Morristown, New Jersey. The general would take no further chances with the young man he looked upon as his son. Once he arrived in camp, having missed the general and excited to tell him the splendid news about the French support, Gilbert threw his arms around Washington and in the French manner kissed him on both cheeks. Many of those nearby were shocked because nobody ever touched the general. But Washington displayed nothing but happiness. This exchange between Washington and Lafayette had become the norm early in their years together and occurred following any period of their separation. And that was a long period of separation. Now, the last source of information I will share today about Lafayette and Washington's relationship is the correspondence by William Alexander Lord Sterling, often to his wife, Lady Sterling. His letters include high praise for Lafayette, especially in reference to the Battle of Brandywine. On that fateful September 11th of 1777, as the news about the British field positions were reported to Washington, Gilbert repetitively requested of the general to be allowed to ride out to the line of battle, simply to observe. Right. It was just 20. Gilbert had just turned 20 only 5 days prior and had been with the general for only 6 weeks. Washington, appearing to be distracted by the news of the battle, agreed to the request. However, once he arrived at the battle line, Gilbert watched as the British advanced. He saw the troops scattering in confusion, reacting instinctively as he was trained to do. He charged at the fleeing men, riding his horse back and forth and shouting to them to regroup. He then dismounted and began shoving them, trying to create an orderly retreat. Lord Stirling wrote that by sheer force of will, Lafayette managed to impose order to his section of the battle line. In the heat of battle, Lafayette did not feel the British bullet pass through his left calf. He remained on the field until the close of the battle, inspiring the men by his presence and courageous actions, something not often done by the high-ranking military. Between Lafayette, General Greene, and General Lord Stirling, an organized retreat was achieved. It was only then that Lafayette's aide-de-camps saw blood seeping from his boot. They found a horse, hoisted him into the saddle, and with only a makeshift bandage, Lafayette continued to encourage the men as they retreated. At Chester Bridge, General Greene deployed troops to defend the crossing, but by then, Lafayette could barely remain in the saddle as he was growing faint from the loss of blood. When General Washington heard that Gilbert had been shot, he immediately sent his personal surgeon, Dr. John Corcoran, to care for him, along with a young French-speaking American captain. The general ordered that Lafayette be immediately transported with a military escort headed by that captain far from the danger of the British capture. In doing so, he said, quote, "Take care of him as if he were my son, for I love him with the same affection." That young American captain would go on to become the future President James Monroe and Lafayette's lifelong friend. As for Gilbert, the Battle of Brandywine proved his valor, but for the general, it nearly ended in tragedy. Yet despite his affectionate bond for Gilbert, Washington could not help but recognize Lafayette's innate ability as both a soldier and a leader. Remembering his own passionate desire to be recognized as worthy of a military command, the general now urged Congress to allow Lafayette a command of his own. Washington, instead of making the military assignment himself, which was the norm, asked Lafayette which division he might choose to command. Immediately, and overwhelmed with gratitude, Gilbert requested a militia from Washington's own home state of Virginia. Be it at Brandywine, Monmouth Courthouse, or under the intense stress of Valley Forge, no doubt would ever exist between the general and Gilbert of their mutual loyalty and true father-son devotion to one another. After the end of the American Revolution, Lafayette returned to America and stayed from August through December of 1784. He spent 6 weeks with Washington, sharing long and enjoyable hours, discussing farming, government, and politics. Yet during the same visit, and unbeknownst to many even today, Lafayette used his influence as a national hero to urge all 13 states to develop a central, unified federal government. He was becoming a polished diplomat. The general and Gilbert's last and very emotional parting came in December of 1784. After Lafayette's departure, in his writings, Washington struggled with the sad realization that he would likely never embrace his adopted son again. During the turmoil that followed the French Revolution, throughout his 5-year imprisonment, and his years of exile from France, Gilbert and Washington wrote to one another as often as they could, and always in the terms of father and son. The last words that Lafayette would receive from Washington was his warning to not come to America in late 1798 during what was due to the XYZ affair, an undeclared naval war with France during the presidency of John Adams. The sad letter was filled with Washington's longing for Gilbert's company, but in the words of a protective father, he felt that there would be too many physical and political dangers for Gilbert on such a trip. The letter did not reach Lafayette until May of 1799 due to his exile in Holland. With intense sadness, Lafayette wrote back, quote, "Your opinion, my dear general, has with me, as it ever has, an immense weight. I know you long to fold me in your paternal heart, yet you advise me against your own satisfaction and mine. You are better informed, and to your judgment, as always, I will submit." Lafayette would do as his dear general told him, just as he had done during the war they fought together side by side. Sadly, Washington never received this letter from Lafayette, dying on December 14th of 1799, without ever knowing that Gilbert was in acceptance of his wishes. On his triumphant farewell tour to America in 1824 through 1825, which we'll hear about, it was an emotional and tearful Lafayette who twice visited the grave of his adopted father at Mount Vernon. And so, to conclude this presentation about the General and Gilbert, it was a relationship that began in 1777, was cemented at the Brandywine and Valley Forge, and would last for the entirety of their lives. For Washington, he found in Lafayette the love and loyalty of a devoted son. And for Lafayette, he found in Washington the love of a caring father and a role model for his own life. Huzzah for America and Viva la Lafayette, and thank you so much for allowing me to share this story about Lafayette and Washington.
Okay, I'm Chuck. I'm with the American Friends of Lafayette. I serve as their executive director. And what I've been doing for the last 4 years is working on a project that is almost over, thank goodness. And that project is the Bicentennial of Lafayette's Grand Tour. And we're going to talk about that today. And we're following Lafayette's footsteps exactly as it happened 200 years ago. So guess what? In August, he came to Loudoun County. So we'll be here in August, I think August 23rd? 8, 9, 10. Okay, very good. 8, 9, 10. And that committee's doing really, really good work. So the American Friends of Lafayette have been around since 1932. We have born in Lafayette College. So Lafayette College, a bunch of alumni got together, and they were collecting all kinds of Lafayette stuff. Letters, all kinds of trinkets, souvenirs from the tour. And they wanted a place to put them, and they wanted to organize a club. And these were judges, senators, congressmen that graduated from Lafayette College. And they formed the American Friends of Lafayette. And to this day, that is really our headquarters. If you ever want to go to Lafayette College, they have all of our stuff there, including their own personal, including the things that they've also collected. In fact, they've collected so many things. Their things and our things are kind of intermingled. We don't know what's ours and what's theirs. But that's fine. It's a great place to visit. Other colleges around the country that have wonderful collections about Lafayette include Cornell and Methodist College in Fayetteville, North Carolina. And Fayetteville, North Carolina is the only city that Lafayette visited that's named after him. The only one. But since then, after he left in 1825, over 80 cities, towns, and counties are named after Lafayette. Think about that. Only Lincoln and Washington are ahead of Lafayette. So he really captured our country in 1824 and 1825. And as we go around the country, exactly as Lafayette did, I promise you, my hair was black last year. As we go around the country, exactly as Lafayette did, we're trying to teach people about 3 important things. Number 1, history is important. Don't get me wrong, science and math are important as well. But think about it. All the questions about the future can be answered simply by studying the past. And that's something we're trying to make sure people understand. As well as, number 2, the importance of the Franco-American alliance. Still an important ally, our oldest ally today. And Lafayette was the genesis of this relationship, to include, of course, Dr. Franklin. We would never have won the Revolutionary War without the French. There were more French soldiers at Yorktown than there were American. Think about that for a second. That's kind of a crazy statistic. So without the French, we'd be having fish and chips in the back today. Number 3, Lafayette. And certainly, Patty did a good job of touching upon this. But Lafayette not only as an important general, but as a human rights leader, not only in our country, but in the world. He was an abolitionist. He believed that all men were created equal. And we wrote that in our Declaration of Independence. He believed that. He treated women as intellectual equals. And that was really important because he didn't understand why my brain was better than your brain. He didn't get that. And women really appreciated that and followed him around the country. And he also was a friend of the Native Americans, and that was an important thing. And we'll talk about that a little further. But that's what we're trying to educate the public about on this tour. Lafayette arrived in the United States for the first time on this grand tour on August 16th, 1824. Now, in 1824, our country was going through a tough time. We were having a very heated election. Our country was divided, very similar to today. So think about that for a second. James Monroe felt that he could bring back the last living general of the Continental Army and heal the country a little bit, bring back patriotic feelings. It was about to be our 50th anniversary as a country, and he thought that would be a good idea, and guess what? It was. And this is the scene of him arriving at Castle Clinton. And Castle Clinton still exists in New York, and we were at Castle Clinton on August 16th, 2024. And it was a great day, amazing day for us. And Lafayette spent a lot of time in Castle Clinton when he was in New York. It was a good gathering place for people. He was there on July 4th, 1825, and guess where we'll be in 2 weeks from tomorrow? So we'll be in Castle Clinton again. So we're very excited for that. Now I'm going to make a case for the fact that Lafayette was America's first rock star. Okay, here we go. The population in New York at the time when Lafayette was here was 123,000. 80,000 people came out to see Lafayette at Castle Clinton. Only 4,000 people came out to see the Beatles. We estimate that we estimate that over half of the American population saw Lafayette in 1824 and 1825. Even Taylor Swift can't say that. There are some similarities, though, between Taylor Swift and Lafayette. Think about it for a second. When Lafayette came to town, he changed that economy for the time he was in town. That happened in 1824 and 1825. So there are some similarities. Also, we'll talk about others in a minute. When Lafayette came to the United States, not only did he heal the country, and not only was he a human rights champion, but he didn't do so in ways where he lectured us. He didn't stand in front of us and say, I'm disappointed in you. That's not how he handled it. The way he handled it is he showed us. For instance, when he went to Yorktown, he saw his friend and fellow Continental Congress. I can't say this word. I'm going to start over. He saw James Armistead Lafayette. James Armistead Lafayette was in the second row of the mass crowd at Yorktown. He's giving a speech in 1824. He recognizes him, stops his speech, walks off the dais, and gives him a hug. Two things happened there that day. First of all, not many people had ever seen a white man's hug a black man. That was very rare in 1824. And he stopped his speech to do so. This was something Americans saw. He also saw, like I said, him treat women as equals, ask for their opinions. He left balls and parties early to meet with Native Americans because that was important to him. He was upsetting people when he was doing this, but it was important to him to stay in touch with the Native Americans, at least the ancestors of the Native Americans that he had met previously during the Revolutionary War. So doing these things in public was very important, and it really showed Americans what we were missing. And it did heal our country, and it did show Americans how we should have been better at our human rights situation. If Lafayette came back today, I think he'd be very pleased at how we've come so far in our human rights and as a country. However, I think he'd also say we have a ways to go. Lafayette made 10 presidents when he was here in 1824. 10. And I never remember all 10, so I wrote them down. These two guys, of course, very important. They were alive when Lafayette was here. They died, obviously, on July 4th, 1826. And he met with them extensively. He especially met with this guy right here because he had the best wine cellar in America. And they actually wrote in their diaries. They actually wrote in their diaries how much wine they were drinking during the course of time. He spent almost 3 weeks at Monticello. He had a really good time there. Of course, he met James Madison. James Madison was the president when he came. I'm sorry, James Monroe, excuse me. He met James Madison. He was still alive. He went to Montpelier. John Quincy Adams, who became president while Lafayette was in our country. He met Andrew Jackson. He went to the Hermitage. And that was probably a very interesting conversation between Lafayette and Jackson. I would think that would have been I would have loved to sit there and listen to that one. Martin Van Buren, William Henry Harrison, John Tyler, and this man right here. Of course, this guy was dead when Lafayette came, but this was one of the most important days of Lafayette's life and of our recreation of his tour. October 17th, 1824, Lafayette walked into the old tomb. They call it the old tomb now. It was the only tomb then. Looks nothing like that, by the way. This probably was painted many, many years after he arrived. But be that as it may, he went into the old tomb. He came out with tears in his eyes, asked his son to join him. They spent about a half an hour together in the tomb, and it was probably it was a very emotional day for Lafayette. He wrote about it extensively, and then we did the same thing. And Mount Vernon was kind enough to let us open up the old tomb. It really was a great opportunity for us to do that, and we did that on October 17th, 2024. Like Taylor Swift, Lafayette was kind of the birth of the souvenir in our country. His face was on everything. Ladies' dresses, plates, bowls, belts, hats. His least favorite thing that he ever saw with his face on was the glove, because when he kissed the lady's hand, he did not appreciate kissing his own face. Who does? I'm sorry? Winterthur, yes, they do. They're very good. And Winterthur also has a chamber pot built in the United Kingdom, in England, with Washington's face inside of it. This is probably the most famous image of Lafayette from the tour. It's the Ari Scheffer portrait. I love it very much. It shows a very stately man. You'll notice, I don't know, I didn't see all the slides that Patty had, but Lafayette had a receding hairline in his 20s. Now all of a sudden he has a full head of hair. That's a toupee. So he was a vain man, which is okay. That's all right, right? But this portrait was very important because it hangs in a very important place. When the President of the United States gives the joint session of Congress, he gives the State of the Union address. In that room, right there, the most famous room maybe in America, there are only two portraits. George Washington and that one of Lafayette right there. The only two portraits in that room, and that one is in there. I think that's kind of an amazing thing. Lafayette not only helped with the American Revolution, but he also helped with other revolutions to include Poland, Bolivia. He was a good friend of Bolivar and wrote with him extensively. In fact, in Paris, their two statues face each other. Greece. The Polish Revolution is interesting because he actually hid Polish rebels in his house in Lagrange. And when you go there and visit Lagrange, you can see in the attic Polish graffiti. It's very, very interesting. This is Lafayette and the Duc Loudoun. He thought that this was finally going to be the leader that our country needed. Of course, it didn't work out again. Yet again, the French didn't get it right. But I like this image of the tricolor, which Lafayette actually invented with the Duke here. Lafayette died on May 20th, 1834, of a respiratory illness, probably similar to what George Washington had. His funeral here in the United States was similar to the one that Washington had as well. John Quincy Adams' eulogy was 3 hours long. Just a few more things for you here. This is Lafayette's grave at Picpus. This is a place where we're going to be coming up in later this month for the flag changing ceremony. As you notice, the American flag flies over this grave. It's flown over the grave since World War I. The interesting thing about, the most important thing about this is the fact that even when Hitler took over Paris, this flag still flew over Lafayette's grave. And this is an image of the flag changing ceremony. The American Friends of Lafayette lay a wreath. The American military is there. The French military is there. Our ambassador is there. It's a very, very important day. Just a couple of little things about Lafayette that happened after his death that I think are important. You know, this World War I recruitment poster. This is Lafayette saying, you know what, I got your back, USA. You know, we got your back, Lafayette. I think this is an interesting thing where they're using Lafayette as a recruitment. I can't talk about this too long. This is one of my favorite subjects about Lafayette. One of my favorite tangents is the Lafayette Escadrille. I highly recommend you buy a book about this. This was a World War I squadron. This is before the United States got involved with World War I. Most of the men on the screen there died. Think about air in the early 1900s, what fighting combat was like in the air. It wasn't easy. And these were daredevils, pretty much. In fact, to the point where, yes, they didn't own dogs, they owned lions. But they named themselves the Lafayette Escadrille after Lafayette's aid to us in the Revolutionary War. The first national park in the United States was Lafayette National Park. Unfortunately, the Acadia family enlarged that park so much that now it's called Acadia National Park in Maine, much to my disappointment. This slide was not supposed to be here, but there it is. We talked about it. This is one of my favorite statues of Lafayette, and this is a good way of tying in my talk with Patty's. You know, I'm standing here today because of the relationship between Washington and Lafayette. August 3rd, 1777 was maybe the most important day of my life because that's the day those two men met. The important thing about that day and the important thing about this relationship was what Patty talked about is nobody treated Washington the way Lafayette did and vice versa. When I did a deep dive on Washington, I saw this relationship as no other relationship I've ever seen. There's a diary out there called Joseph Plum Martin's diary. He was a private that was almost in every major battle of the Revolutionary War. And in that diary, he talks about this relationship, and Patty touched upon this, how Lafayette touched Washington. Nobody ever touched Washington. Hugged him. Spoke to him plainly. That's okay. So anyway, this statue is in two places. It's the exact same statue. It's done by Bartoli, who did the Statue of Liberty, and it is in Paris and in New York City, right near Columbia University. That was not supposed to be here either. And that's the question period. That's the statue that faces Boulevard. Like I said, they're together. So I'm going to ask Patty to come up and help me answer some questions, and we're happy to help you. But please, we gave brochures on where we're going to be for the tour. We've really done an amazing job. We even sunk a boat in Indiana. He had a shipwreck.
The dog in the boat. Right?
Yeah, the dog. He had a shipwreck in Indiana. We recreated that. Let's see, today's what? Yesterday, we recreated the laying of the Bunker Hill Monument, which Lafayette did. So if you can think of something that Lafayette did, we've done it, and we're really, really proud of it. It's been quite a journey, an expensive journey. We've raised a lot of money to do this, but I'm really proud of our organization and what we've done. So thank you very much.